Viral debrief. Coming up. Hey 7-4 crew, welcome back. If you don't know me, my name's Kelsey. I'm a 747 pilot. My channel, 7-4 Gear, is all about aviation. I want to thank all of you in the 7-4 crew. Honestly, you've been sending me a ton of videos for this series. Without your help, I couldn't do this. I appreciate all of you so much. I can't tell you enough how much I appreciate you. If you have a video you want to see in this series, the two easiest places to send them to me, the free forum, 74gear.com, or just send it to my Instagram. Let's get into it. You may be wondering, why did they take off after they touched down on the ground? Why did the engine spool up after the wheels hit the ground? If you didn't notice, listen again to when the engine actually spools up. The engines on these jets take a while to actually spool up. When we move the throttle forward or we initiate a go-around, even though we push it, it still takes a second for the fuel to get in the engines and the engines to do all the things that it needs to spool up. And you may have noticed that as they were coming into land, they were actually landing short of where the targeted landing area is. See this right here? I believe this is the 1,000-foot markers, which is where the pilots want to actually touch down at. We aim for these 1,000-foot markers, which are 1,000 feet down the runway. It gives ourselves a margin of error, so we don't land too early and land before the actual runway starts, because everybody makes mistakes. So we use this 1,000-foot marker as our planned touchdown area. But as we rewind it, you'll see they touched down well before that. There are two possible scenarios here. One is that the pilots were coming in too slow and didn't have enough speed to actually get to the touchdown zone, those 1,000-foot markers. So by coming in too slow, a lot of times what will happen is the plane will actually lose lift because there's not enough air coming over the wings, and then when that happens, the plane will actually drop out of the sky. Generally, when that's happening, what you'll see is that the pilots will pull the power too early before touchdown. And it didn't sound like they pulled the power too early, and that's typically the cause for a hard landing. The pilots will pull the power too early and the plane will touch down really hard because it just lost the forward momentum. So that's one cause. Now it could be that they were going very slow and so then the power got pulled back and then it just dropped out of the sky the last few feet. That's one possible scenario what causes hard landing. The other possible scenario, which is really hard to tell because we're looking at the wings, which is the center point, the point where everything's moving around. But at that center point, if you don't actually flare the plane right before touchdown, what will happen is it will just pound into the ground. Notice here the plane flares, which means the nose goes up in the air. That's what we do a few feet before we hit the ground, depending on the type of plane that you're flying. You want to have that nose go up, and then you'll see it come back down a little bit. That's something we do before landing, and that cushions the landing. Now, I've flown a plane in and I've not flared, and part of the reason is because the instructor that I was flying with said, hey, we need to get this on a very specific spot, so don't flare and try to make this a soft landing. What they meant to say is don't flare a lot, but what I took it as don't flare at all. So I just drove that plane in right into the ground, which is possibly what happened here. If the pilots didn't flare at all, which again, it's hard to tell because we're only looking at the wing and that's the center point where it would be moving around, so you're not going to see a lot of motion there. But if they didn't flare at all and they just drove that plane in, that's what the landing would look like. I said this before, but it is worth repeating. If you're ever on a plane and you see the pilots doing this thing called a go-around, which means they were trying to land or they landed and then they go back up in the air, this is not something that you should be scared of. This is something that you should look at as a positive thing. These pilots are making a decision to go back up in the air and make a better landing. What can happen if you have a hard landing like this, the plane can bounce up in the air and now it's very uncontrolled. So the fact that they're choosing to go back up in the air is the safest course of action. And so when you have that experience, you should be thinking, okay, great, these pilots are taking the best and safest course of action for me, and that should help you relax. My guess is these pilots were coming in, they thought they were going to hit the 1,000-foot markers. Once they realized that they weren't going to be close enough to that touchdown zone, they made the decision to do the go-around. However, it wasn't quick enough. So by initiating that go-around, and once you've made that initiation, either saying it or hitting the button or pushing the throttles forward, any of those things, once that happens, now you're going back up in the air no matter what, because it would get very dangerous if you push the power up and then decided to change your mind, something like that. Now it can take a bad situation and make it really bad. So once the other pilot says go around, or once they hit the button that says go around, it's time to go around. You'll come back in and try it again. So my guess is as the plane was coming in, one pilot was thinking, we're going to do a go around. And then once they were getting slow and not getting into that touchdown zone, and you heard the power come back, the other pilot probably said go around, or hit the button, or took the controls. Who knows what took place up on the flight deck. But either way, once that decision is made to do a go around, what will happen in some cases is the wheels will actually hit on the ground and you'll go back up in the air. The same thing can happen when you're flying in very, very low visibility. What will happen is you're coming in and there's a certain altitude that you need to be able to see the runway. If you don't see the runway, then it's going to be a go around. What can happen though is when you don't see the runway and you initiate that go around, the plane is still descending. So it takes a second or two for these engines to spool up. So what can happen is the engines are spooling up, but your momentum is still going down. So your wheels can touch the ground and then you go back up in the air. It happens sometimes actually in the simulator. You'll see it when the planes are coming in and we initiate a go around, but at a very low altitude, the wheels will touch and you'll go back up in the air. It's not something to be concerned about though.
Toma foto.
I have no idea what airport this is at, but my guess is they weren't landing on a runway something really short, like 1,500 feet, so there was no reason for the pilots to aim at the very, very start of that runway. And I don't know what this car is doing because typically on airports like this, there's a stop sign or something saying, be aware of planes or landing planes or things like that. And even if there's not a sign that says that, you should have some common sense that you're driving around an airport, so there are planes to be looking out for. But what's just super savage about this is that they stop right here in front of the plane and the plane hits them as they're getting ready to land. I do feel bad for the pilot here because when you're landing, you get tunnel vision. You get focused on what you're doing, which is looking at your instruments inside the flight deck and looking outside the plane at your landing area. Those are the two areas that you're looking. You're typically not looking to the left and to the right of cars or anything like that. You're typically very focused on your touchdown area and the instruments, keeping your speed up and things like that. So the fact that a car would pull out in front of them is not something you typically see. However, there was a TikTok where somebody said these airplane seats aren't safe for car crashes, and I guess now maybe she was right. But I've mentioned this thing about landing at the very start of the runway. They call it landing on the numbers because every runway is numbered right there. That number is at the very beginning. They call it landing on the numbers, and I mentioned that can get you into trouble. Take a look at this. This car is about 5.5 feet tall, and they aren't even driving on the runway. So this plane is flying way too low. They would have made the runway if the car wasn't here, but there's no reason to be landing this early down the runway. There's no reason to do that. People will make the argument that having that runway behind you is useless, and that's true. If you have a bunch of runway behind you, it is useless. But this thing about landing on the numbers or at the very start of the runway, I've seen multiple scenarios where the pilots misjudge that distance and then they come in too slow or hit something or hit the grass or they lose airspeed or the wind drops out or things like that and they don't land in the right spot and then they get in trouble. So the thing is that people are trying to land on these very short distances or they think, oh, this isn't enough runway for me to land. We just landed a 747 in a little under 7,000 feet the other day. So we were coming in to land and taking the plane to a maintenance base. That runway is under 7,000 feet. We came in and landed there fine, no problem. For those of you that are going to go through flight school, my suggestion would be pick the 1,000-foot markers, go land and try to stop in the shortest available distance. And just see, if I really get on the brakes, how short can I stop? And what you'll find out is that it's not a lot of room that you really need. So this decision of landing at the numbers, it's going to put you in a lot more danger than it's going to do you any good. Now there are fighter jets like Navy fighter pilots that have to land on an aircraft carrier. They do a lot of training to get that precise, and it is a super specialized skill, and that's why they're some of the best in the world, because their runway is moving around and pitching and rolling and doing all kinds of things, so they need to do that and land on a very specific area. There is a lot of training to do that though. These people didn't start flying and just go, okay, now we're going to land in this tiny little area. There was a lot of training that went ahead of that. So if you can do that and you can always land on those 1,000-foot markers, just like they're always landing on that very small aircraft carrier, you're going to have plenty of distance to stop. So landing on the numbers is going to get you in trouble a lot more often than it's going to do you any good. I pulled this off the FAA website. Here it's showing that the typical path that you're given to land a plane is going to put you about 50 to 60 feet over the threshold when you come into land. That gives you an idea of roughly where you should be. Now, that is going to apply different on different planes, but this pilot was maybe going to be 3 feet off the ground when they crossed the threshold. There's no reason to be that close to the runway as you're coming into land. You don't need that much landing distance. If you are at a place where you need that much landing distance, you're on a very, very, very short runway, and there's probably not cars passing around back and forth like that. You're doing a very precise and calculated type of landing, so you're not going to have people moving around. When I was doing my private pilot check ride, I'd done everything, and I'd passed everything, and we were coming in for the last part. I think it was a short field landing. And the examiner said, all right, you got 2 choices for this landing. We can land on the numbers or you can land on the 1,000-foot markers, but you're gonna have to stop in this distance or whatever the maneuver was. It's been so long. But my decision was, I'm gonna land on the 1,000-foot marker, right? Because if you land on the numbers and you miss, and you land too early and you get yourself into the dirt, well, not only did you fail your check ride, but now you have to do a bunch of paperwork and you're going to have a thing on your record, and I didn't want that. So I made the decision, I'll land on the 1,000-foot markers. Now, I landed on the 1,000-foot marker fine, but the point is that that's a decision that you need to make. By landing on the 1,000-foot markers and stopping in time, okay, you have more than enough distance. And if you made a mistake and you landed too early, I would have failed my check ride, but I wouldn't have had to fill out a report or go talk to the FAA or have something on my record or any of those types of things. So you just got to make those good decisions while you're out there flying when you're an airline pilot, but that all starts when you start in flight school.
Too low, terrain. Too low, terrain. Too low, terrain. 50, too low, terrain. 30, too low, terrain. Too low, terrain. 10.
Where are you from? Where did you learn flying? How the hell you become a fighter pilot? You are going like this all the time. Not acceptable. All the time I'm telling you, big time, you bloody hell. Lower your head. You're giving a damn rudder. Why?
If you end up deciding to be a pilot, at some point in your career, you're going to have an instructor or a captain or somebody who's going to be exactly this guy. And that's why I'm laughing, because I have been in that seat and having somebody yell at me saying like, why are you doing it like this? So it's funny to me because I've flown with those people. Something besides the point of the reason why I want to talk about this video is you notice here, it looks like the captain's actually putting some inputs into the yoke. Typically, you're only going to have one pilot flying at one time, and either they're going to say my controls, and that's how it should be, where they take the controls away from you, or they just let you continue to jack it up and mess it up, which obviously this pilot wasn't doing everything the way he should be doing. But it's just something I noticed the captain had actually put some control inputs here, which is technically not the way it's supposed to happen. If you decide to become a pilot or really in any job, you're eventually going to have a boss or an instructor or somebody that is going to yell at you and talk to you the way that this captain is talking to the first officer here. And I'm going to give you some advice that has nothing to do with anything technical, but it's just my experience of dealing with these types of people. The first thing is, while you're flying, while the plane's in motion, you never want to escalate the situation. Just let things play out until you get to the plane stop. Because the reality is, whatever argument or whatever disagreement or any of that stuff is really secondary to the safety of the plane, the passengers, the crew, all that stuff. So you can have a disagreement, and in this case, it's typically going to be the captain yelling or saying something, or the instructor yelling or saying something. And the thing is just bite your tongue, wait till you get on the ground, and once you're on the ground and the plane is stopped, now that's the time you can talk about it. There's a few different ways you can handle it. One, you can get combative with them. It's typically not going to end very well. I've seen it go that way. The other thing that I've seen pilots do is they write reports. They go behind the captain's back, write a report. This guy's a dickhead. I don't like him, blah, 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 blah. And I think that's kind of a weak way to do it. My advice, what I would suggest is either A, don't fly with them again. You can put them on your no-fly list. Or B, if you are going to write a report, before you write the report, tell them to their face that they're going to write a report. Because this is my thought on it. By writing the report and not saying something to their face, that means you're just a big scaredy cat. If you're going to write the report, tell them to their face, look, I flew with you. I didn't enjoy this. I think this is unprofessional. And whatever it is that you want to say, you can go ahead and say it to their face and just let them know, I'm going to write a report on you. Now, if that happened to me and somebody were to write a report on me for yelling or screaming, and they told me to my face, hey, I'm going to write a report on you regarding this, I would at least respect them for telling me to my face that they really didn't like flying with me. Then if I just one day out of the blue getting a call from the chief pilot saying, hey, you just flew with Frank. Frank hates you. I would be like, what? I didn't even know. And that's sometimes what it feels like. You get backdoored by somebody that just doesn't like you. What I do like about this video though is in your career, about 90% of the people you fly with aren't going to be memorable. But there's going to be a percentage of great captains that you fly with and a percentage of people like this that you're going to fly with. And the thing is you can learn just as much from a bad captain as you can learn from a good captain. So when you have this and you're feeling upset about it, but in reality, you should be thankful for the situation because it's showing you the type of captain that you don't want to be or the things that you don't like from them. There is a lot that you can learn from flying with someone that you really don't like flying with. Those different experiences, the really great captains and the really bad captains, are going to help you to become a better leader. You can emulate the captains that you flew with and go, man, I really liked him or I really liked her. She was a great captain. I liked this and this and this that she did. You can emulate those experiences. And if you want, get their phone number and ask them to be a mentor for you when the time comes for you to become a captain. Use those experiences, the good and the bad, to make yourself the captain that you wish would be the ideal captain to fly with. I found when I was a teenager that I would leading different groups that yelling, I would try to motivate people through yelling. I realized later on that doesn't work at all. And so I don't ever yell at people. You'll rarely see me getting upset unless I'm very hungry. If I'm hungry, it's like all bets are off. If I'm hungry, I'm very easily irritable. But other than that, it's really hard to get me to yell. So in this scenario where this pilot is yelling at this other pilot, it is not helping this other pilot to become a better pilot. That's not going to help them at all. The best thing to do would be land and then get to the gate and then say, okay, look, here's what you did wrong, and teach them and train them and help them become better. Take responsibility for their career and help them move along and progress to become a better pilot, because the reality is you're going to be retired, you're going to be a person in the back, that guy's going to be a captain. So the better that you mentor them to be the best pilot they can be, the safer you're going to be as a passenger on their aircraft in the future.
It's great.
Okay, take picture. Okay, take picture. Okay, come here. Stupid.
Get off my airplane, please.
Okay,
You're unsafe.
Theo, I know you're
unsafe.
making voice. I know you're making voice.
You're unsafe. Don't put your finger in my
Theo.
face like that again.
Theo, I know.
I figured it wasn't fair to roast the captains and not mention the other side of that, which is the really bad first officers. I really don't like captains that scream and yell. It really just irritates me. It's not necessary. I don't become a better pilot from it. So I don't like seeing that when I'm on a four-man crew and I see a captain being rude to the new first officer or first officer. I'm thinking, this is not helping this person to become any better. So I don't really like that. And the other type of thing is I don't like first officers that are entitled. Now, maybe this guy's having a bad day. Maybe he's the nicest guy ever, but he really comes off, at least in this video, as being a super entitled first officer that's a little bit full of himself. I don't really like entitled people like that. That's just my own personal take. But those are the worst FOs that think they're really great and they really suck and they think they're amazing. Those are the worst, most dangerous pilots you're ever going to fly with. The I think I'm really good and they are really bad, those are the worst. If you fly with a guy and they show up to your plane and they say, hey man, I'll be honest, I'm kind of new on the plane and I'm a little bit weak and I'm not very good at this, or I'm not really good at my landing, those pilots are going to end up being really great pilots. The ones that show up, don't say anything, and they're like, I'm pretty good, and then they're not good, those are the really, really dangerous pilots that you need to be careful of. And in my experience, when I've seen people that don't know they're bad, those are the people you need to be the most scared of. Man, they're low. Remember what I said earlier about crossing 50 to 60 feet above the threshold? So when a runway is getting repaired, they may have the threshold moved, basically creating a displaced threshold. With these cones here, this is the new threshold. Typically, that's going to be in the paperwork before you go there so you know it's coming, or it's going to be on the weather information as you're coming into land. They're going to say maintenance in progress, landing available distance is this, or as you're coming in, you're going to just see there are people out there and there are cones. But either way, you can see this plane is not even close to being 50 feet above the top of this truck. Had they not moved, they may have clipped the truck. When you start flying in the real world, what you'll notice is that there are going to be a lot of different changing circumstances. You may go to a place and think the weather's going to be great, and it ends up being really foggy or poor visibility, and now you at the last minute you have to go somewhere. You may be going somewhere and think, oh, it's a little bit icy, and then all of the airports around it start closing up because of ice. I've had both of those situations happen to me. It is a little bit uncomfortable, but that is the challenge of becoming a pilot. You have to be able to think with the information that you have, use the people around you to make the best, safest decisions, and then you have to go and make the best of that circumstances that you've been dealt. In this scenario, these pilots should have known before they even headed out there was going to be runway maintenance, or they were going to be doing repairs. I don't think they typically just out of the blue just start doing maintenance on a runway. Either way, there was some information before they came in to land there that this type of repair was going to be taking place. By this pilot making the decision to come in very, very low like that and come in right over the cones tells me either they didn't plan accordingly based off of the visual guidance outside, they used that to come down, or they used the on-field guidance to help them get onto the runway. Because those things don't necessarily change, especially if it's just for a short time. They'll leave that on-field guidance, which is going to give you a glide path to start you at the earlier part of the runway. Then realizing, oh, we're not landing till further, they just kept the power in to kind of float over the top, and then they were going to drop in. That's not a great way to play the situation, because if you were to come in and that truck were to not move and you were to just get one tire were to grab that truck, it would obviously crush the truck because it's a much heavier plane. It's got a lot more momentum than the earlier video. But you could end up having a wing strike. It could spin the plane out of control. There's a bunch of things that could happen in that scenario. And this is, I don't know, a $30 or $40 million jet. And the owner of that jet, who's probably inside that jet, would not be happy to find out that you just decided to coast over the very top of the runway because you didn't do your homework before you flew in there. So it's important when you're flying to pay attention to what's going on by reading the NOTAMs, the notice to airmen before you go in there, and know what type of situation you're going to get into so you don't have this situation. Because if they had clipped that truck, it would have been possibly a really bad situation. Now that situation doesn't apply, however, when you're James Bond. When you're James Bond and you're flying and your tire hits a truck or a car, it doesn't really matter. If you don't believe me, check out this Hollywood versus reality where James Bond does exactly that and the truck just flies away and the plane keeps flying and there's no gravity or stuff that doesn't apply to them. If you want to see something a little bit funnier though, check out this video up here. I look forward to hearing from you. Until then, keep the blue side up.